Yeah, everybody hear me? Good afternoon and welcome everybody on behalf of the Department of Political Studies and Public Administration and the Hassan Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs here at AUB. We are extremely pleased this afternoon to have with us Dr. Salman of Sitta, who will be giving a lecture today entitled Palestine, Reversing Ethnic Cleansing. Dr. Sitta, I think many of you know him. He's a prolific writer and a prominent activist on Palestinian refugees and the right of return. He's published over 300 articles on these topics and several books, including The Return Journey in 2007, The Atlas of Palestine, 1948 Palestine in 2004, and the Palestinian Nakba, 1948, the Register of the Depopulated Localities in Palestine. He's the founder and president of the Palestine Land Society, and I recommend his website, as many of his documents and many of his articles and writings are on this website. It's on the flyer, and we can put the website on for you later on. But I will say this, which is very interesting, that if you were to go to his website, I'm not sure if you know this, Dr. Sitta, the first thing that you will get when you go to his website is it says reported attack site. This website, which is www.pland.org, has been reported as an attack site and has been blocked based on your security preferences, not my security preferences. Attack sites try to install programs that steal private information, use your computer to attack others, or damage your system. Some attack sites intentionally distribute harmful software, but many are compromised without the knowledge or permission of their owners. And it basically gives you the option to get me out of here, so you don't go to the website at all, or why was it blocked, which takes you to another site, which is a very long site to tell you why it is blocked, but by the time you're through with that, you're bored and you just want to get out of there and not actually access the website. Now, if I were part of the certain groups of people, I would have put this myself, because what Dr. Salman of Sitta has is extremely dangerous, intellectually speaking, in any case. As we said, he's a prolific writer. As his lecture will demonstrate quite clearly, his writings, which are passionate, are not just engaged in polemics, but in extremely sound and scientific observations and calculations, which includes this quite extraordinary map which Dr. Sitta has produced, and I think there are some copies that can be distributed in not quite this size, but in some size anyway, can be distributed to those that are interested in it. Dr. Sitta is also the general coordinator of the Right of Return Congress from Auda, and he's a member on the board of several NGOs dealing with Palestinian refugees and human rights. He has also been a member of the Palestinian National Council since 1974. I don't want to take too much more time, because Dr. Sitta has said that his lecture will be around 45 minutes or so, and we want to certainly allow as many questions and discussion as possible with Dr. Sitta. So without further ado, please help me welcome Salman of Sitta.
Thank you very much, Kareem. We are aware of the attack of our amiable friends, but truth will never be hidden for a long time. We are working on the website. You can go straight to URL www.plands.org. You will see the site. I'm pleased to be here in AUB. I have been around a lot in many universities. This is the first time I'm here at AUB, so it seems you fly all over and then you come closer to home. And ladies and gentlemen, today you are witnessing one more day in the longest war in history waged against a people, not an army, not a state. It is now 90 years since the last Western colonial project, initiated by Balfour and Weizmann, was planted in Palestine. It only succeeded in sowing death and construction since then. Never, never in its 5,000 years history has Palestine witnessed such massive uprooting of its people, ethnically cleansing of 675,000 villages, such massive dispossession and confiscation of property. 93% of Israeli area is Palestinian property. So are the contents of its towns and villages, public buildings, roads, railways, ports, and of course its water resources. Never before has Palestine been the subject of so many UN resolutions condemning these crimes and deeds and calling for removing this colossal injustice with absolutely nothing done about it. The victims of this injustice are today 11 million Palestinians, of whom 7 million are refugees, including 4.7 million registered refugees. They are languishing in exile while Jewish European immigrants are enjoying the fruits of their conquest. But this unprecedented, catastrophic event has a peculiar characteristic. It is like a constantly running play. The players change, but the same story goes on and on. If you missed all the events since First World War, you must have seen the carnage in Gaza last January. This is the latest replica of past events. Now let me take 1 minute of your time and let us look back for a moment at the beginnings. The opening scene finds Herzl in 1903 approaching his lawyer to draft for him the charter for the first Jewish colonial project by the name of Jewish Colonization Trust in East Africa. The lawyer was none other than David Lloyd George. The British found the British too ambitious and probably threatening, so they turned it down. In 1904, 1 year later, a professor of chemistry, Chaim Weizmann, befriended his MP by the name of James Arthur Balfour and introduced him to Zionism. In 1917, that same Lloyd George became Britain's Prime Minister and Balfour became Foreign Secretary. Together with Weizmann, they redrafted the old colonial document and it became known as the Balfour Declaration. Scene 2. Scene 2 finds the Allied players dropping leaflets on Bilad al-Sham in the summer of 1916, promising the Arabs full independence as soon as they both defeat the Turks. At the very same time, a man who lived here a long time in Beirut and a young, rich English aristocrat huddled in a room with drawn curtains and with a map of the Middle East between them. Thus, George Picot got the piece of cake called North Syria, that is present Syria and Lebanon, and Mark Sykes got Palestine and Iraq. Since then, we are painted as Palestinians. You are painted as Lebanese. And a little to the east, they are called Syrians. Any villager in any one of these regions at the time would be baffled by this new designation. This treachery was planned by those diplomats wearing top hats and exchanging polite conversation at the dinner table had to be dressed up in a civilized legal garb. They found a way. The way is to the League of Nations bestowed upon Palestine its sacred trust of civilization, by which Palestine was put under mandate class A, that is, it is fit for independence as soon as the mandatory power, Britain, would finish its task of helping Palestine to build its institutions. The task is not finished until today, and Palestine remains under the guardianship of the United Nations as its responsibility. Why wasn't the task finished after 92 years? It's because the guardian became the villain. It is because those who applied the sacred trust of civilization are the same who betrayed it. The mandatory power, Britain, represented by Herbert Samuel, established in his first term in 1920 to 1925 the legal foundations of the components of the State of Israel. Moreover, in the following 28 years, the British mandate allowed Jewish European immigrants into Palestine, thereby increasing Jewish population from 9% to 30% of the population. But more ominously, the Zionist Jews built an army of 120,000 soldiers by the end of the mandate, or 20% of the Jewish community in Palestine, which is 15 times the rate in any country. The number of soldiers, these soldiers, at that time, is comparable to the number of American forces in Afghanistan today, which is vastly bigger. So in 1948, they bounced in Palestine and carried out the largest, longest, pre-planned and continuous ethnic cleansing operation in modern history. This is an animation of that process. The blue areas are the Jewish land under the British mandate, and the rest has been taken over by the Zionists in 1948. The yellow lights shows massacres committed in various places. This shows you the progress in every 2-week intervals, and that's the end. Now, this shows you the occupied land. But what about the people themselves? What happened to them? If we examine what happened to the people, we will see that these villages have been depopulated in this manner, according to their scale. And on 15th of May 1948, when the State of Israel was established, already Ben Gurion expelled half of the total refugees today. Half of them were expelled. While the British were there watching, before any Arab soldiers comes to Palestine, and therefore the myth that Israel is defending itself is absolutely false. At that time, 15th May, Ben Gurion had control of only 13% of Palestine. And then, in the next 10 months, he took over 78% of Palestine. Why did he expel those people? I mark this date. Because those people would have been citizens in the state which he tried to establish under the partition plan. The state would have 50% Palestinian citizens, and therefore he has to carry out very massive and complete ethnic cleansing so that the state will have no Arabs in it whatsoever. If we continue to see what happens thereafter, we will see that the refugees have been expelled at various intervals. But I'd like to attract your attention to the flat part of the curve. When there is no military operations, nobody left. And actually, you can actually see that clearly if you see the military operations. When there is no military operation, the yellow is the truce. So nobody of the refugees left when there was truce. So it is a lie to say that the refugees left on their accord or on orders of Arab countries. But why did they leave during the operation? Because there were a systematic arrangement of massacres. Every one of those has a record. It's not just dots for your review. Everyone has a record. You can find it in our references. So, therefore, that is the picture which created the problem. Now, in other words, if you look at Palestine before the Nakba, this is what you see. About 1,300 villages. And then the Nakba came, and so the place looked empty of its people who lived in it 5,000 years. And then they were expelled into these locations, 602, of course there are 59 camps, but I'm counting all the subsidiary places. So here you have that unusual, unprecedented situation in history. Now, this could not escape the attention of many people in the world. One of them, a distinguished man of peace, who saw this tragedy, is Count Foch Bernadotte. He was the UN mediator in Palestine. But Jewish terrorists assassinated him on the day of his final report. Fortunately for us, they were a bit late, because his report reached the United Nations and became the cornerstone for the famous resolution 194. Now, 194 has three elements. We always talk about it as being about the refugees, but it has three elements. The first element, it calls for the return of the refugees. The second one, it calls for their relief and assistance until they return. And the third one, which is not spoken about and want to speak about today, is it creates the mechanism for the implementation of the resolution, namely the United Nations Conciliation Commission of Palestine, UNCCP. But here, I would like to give you a human touch. I found in Philadelphia archives of the Quakers, who were the first to come to the aid of Palestinians, a letter from their officer in Gaza dated October 12, 1949, 1 year after Nakba. He says, they, the refugees, feel strongly that the United Nations are responsible for their plight and therefore have the total responsibility to feed, house, clothe, and repatriate them. Above all else, he says, they desire to go home, back to their lands and villages, which are in many cases very close. Without it, they would have nothing to live for. It is as genuine and deep as a man's longing for his home can be. That's what he said. Today, 62 years later, this very same message is still echoed by the sons and grandsons of the refugees. We are entitled to ask the question, after having known what happened to the refugees, what happened to their land? What happened to their property? A man called Joseph Weiss, he was the chief land grabber and the chief operator of land ethnic cleansing, visited Galilee immediately after expansion. And he wrote these poetic words. And he says, as the road continues over mountains, the Galilee is revealed to me in its splendor. The hidden places unfolds its crimson smile and green softness and its desolation. I have never seen it like this. It was always bustling with man and beast. A strange stillness lies over the mountain. An empty village, what a terrible thing. Fossilized lives. Lives turned into fossilized whispers and scrolling dog, thin-tailed and flappy-eared and dark-eyed. But at the very same moment, I had a feeling throbbing in my heart from primordial depths, a feeling of victory, of taking control, of revenge. And you know, war, this was our war. That's what he said. So obviously, they do not have time to waste. And with the towns and villages and the wealth of the country, minus its people, they open to them. Wave after wave of looters came. This is a known part of the history of 1950 to 1960, what happened to our land in Palestine. Well, you have seen that, so we'll go over it. And this is where the Palestinians are today. So, what did the Zionists found in Palestine? 675 towns and villages with all what's in them. The kitchen, unmade bed, children's toys. What did they do with that? We have reconstructed what happened. And we found wave after wave of looters. First they started with the main cities in Jaffa, then Ramla and Jerusalem, and then the area between them, and then another area. But the first looters were the Jews in the neighboring kibbutz. The second were the army officers who actually literally turned their tanks back and went to the villages and towns and loaded their trucks. From Lidda they took 1,800 trucks full of goods. And the fourth group of looters, were high Mapai officials who divided the rich villas in Jerusalem among them. And the fifth were the businessmen in Jaffa who sat, the Chamber of Commerce, sat together and divided the Arab business between them. And the sixth was the Jewish Agency and Jewish National Fund who took over the farms and the lands. And the sixth group, or next group, is surprisingly the archaeology officers. They descended upon the towns and villages, tried to extract something to prove there is Jewish history in the area. And then they ordered the destruction of anything which did not meet that criteria. And after that, the Jewish National Fund took over much of the land. Why is that? Ben Gurion was afraid that the international community would force him to let the refugees go back. So he created a fictitious deal between him and the JNF that they will buy certain pieces of the choicest pieces of land in Palestine, so that when he is asked to let the refugees back, he says, this land is out of my reach. And this force arrangement involved 372 villages taken over by the Jewish National Fund, which is registered as an international organization with charity status, and the people who lost their land from GNF alone is 54% of the refugees. So here you have a case of confiscation of property by an international organization. In order to conceal that, because they could not consume all this land, they planted many parks in this area, and this is the description of location of these parks. In order to remember those Western accomplices who helped them in that, you get parks in the name of Balfour and Lloyd George and others. And of course they honor some people by having these parks in their name. This Allen Park I mentioned specially because it has special significance. It is built on land occupied in 1967 on the ruins of the biblical village of Imwas in Nakba and Yalo. It was occupied and destroyed by Rabin in June of 1967. And Canadian Jews donated money to build that park. Of course, they have done something against the international law. And they retracted the name and they changed it. It was called Canada Park. It's now called Island Park. But let me go back to what happened with Resolution 194. UNCCP started their job in good faith from January to May 1949. And then on May 12, 1949, Israel surprisingly signed the Protocol of Lausanne. And this protocol says, we accept partition plan, we accept the return of refugees. Marvelous. But it was a trick, because the Americans pressured the Israelis, if you don't sign that, we will not endorse your membership into the United Nations. This was done, they became members of the United Nations. 2 days later, they reneged and they issued a statement, and I quote, the main purpose of our statement is to undermine the protocol of 12 May, from Itan to Ben Gurion. So that was just strict to be true. This is a crucial date. I would like to remember that, because May 49 meant lots of things. First, it meant that we became members of the United Nations, also became the date when which they reneged on their promise to return the refugees, and hence that's why the membership of Israel in the United Nations is conditional, the only country which has conditional membership, upon the return of the refugees and the membership and the partition plan. And so the main American delegate, Etheridge, who insisted on the return of refugees, resigned in disgust. And then the American position switched since then to the Israeli side. Instead of talking about repatriation, they started talking about economic help, like Marshall Plan. And the relief organization has a new legislation now called UNRWA, and in December 49, the legislation was created to be a successor to the previous relief organization, but with one difference. That is, to implement settlement of refugees away from their homes. In other words, it was given the task of the perpetuation of the ethnic cleansing carried out by Israel. Israel, in its turn, did not waste time. just weeks before UNRWA started operations in May 1950, feeling immune from international pressure, Israel passed a comprehensive law, the Absentees Property Law, to seize and confiscate all refugee property. All this happened in a very short space of time. But the change in the course of UNCCP, instigated by the Americans, continued over the following 6 years. Mission came and left, clever division of Arab waters, discreet and indiscreet pressure on host countries, all with the aim of carting away the refugees from Palestine. But all this failed. In the following 6 years after that, the refugees themselves revolted and destroyed UNRWA stores and demonstrated at distribution centers, shouting, "We do not want your food or your money. We want our homes back." And then, as you know the story, the Fedayeen group started to operate in the Israeli-occupied part of Palestine, and secret national societies were formed, leading 10 years later to forming the PLO. Since then, of course, UNRWA played a heroic role in serving the refugees through wars, raids, and siege, and so on. But at first, Western powers paid generously to UNRWA. Why? Because the aim was to alleviate the pressure of international law in Israel, which prevented the return of refugees, by finding a home for them elsewhere. They saw, of course, the refugees always a source of instability. But now, in this decade, the interest of Western powers in UNRWA waned. According to UNRWA budget for 2008, UNRWA spent from donations from UN member states the amount of $76 per refugee per year. Americans pay of that 27%. That is 6 cents per day per refugee. But the United States pays $1,000 per Israeli Jew, equally divided between economic and military aid. But actually, the U.S. not only pays peanuts to the Palestinians, but also aggravates the problem by assisting Russians to immigrate to live in Palestinian homes. The outcome of this is that Israel now has a nightclub bouncer as its foreign minister. Since the 90s, U.S. paid Israel $50 to $80 million per year, and it pays the Russian immigrants 30 times what it pays to the Palestinian refugees. The European Commission pays considerable amounts to UNRWA and an additional amount to keep PA afloat. But knowingly or otherwise, the Europeans finance the Israeli occupation by taking this responsibility on their shoulders, which is the duty of Israel as the occupied power according to the Geneva Convention. Perhaps the Europeans, with their good intentions, are well advised to stand squarely to Israel and tell them what they already believe, I'm sure, and they say behind closed doors, "You are violating international law. Shape up or else you shall face sanctions, boycott, or even siege." Unfortunately, it's Gaza refugees who are under siege. The Europeans don't even seem to have the courage to claim from Israel the cost of hospitals and institutions they built and Israel destroyed. Now, we come to the quartet. Tony Blair offers financial and political bribes with the added incentive to lift the siege on Gaza and the barriers in the West Bank if, and only if, Palestinians will get Palestine and accept Israel's condition that Palestine, as they know it, does not exist. It is actually an anomaly that this condition is put forward. It has nothing to do with the quartet. Let me read for you paragraph 79 of the End of Mission report by Alvaro de Soto, who is the successor of Bernadotte. He wrote it 1 year ago. He says, another public misunderstanding is the characterization of the principles laid down by the quartet are conditions. These are not conditions of the quartet. while they appear to be conditions for two quartet members, the US and the European Union, this is due to their own legislation rather than a quartet decision. And he says Russia and the UN are used as a shield for what the US and the European Union do. See in the news all the time, if you accept the quartet, the $4.5 billion in Sharm el-Sheikh will be waiting for you. That's what is behind it. So the question then arises, how long really should the Palestinians endure this situation? They already suffered from the longest war in history against the people, as you know. Many Balfours came and went, but his legacy remained. No remorse, no mercy, but relentless pursuit of the same aim, to annihilate the Palestinians politically, geographically, and historically. During all these years, as you, I'm sure, read and seen, we had peace emissaries, commissions, missions, Johnston, Yari, Rogers, and after 1967, assortment of Israelis. Then came the biggest hoax of all, Oslo. If you count these reports and proposals and missions, I did that, you would find about 50 or 60 proposals since 1948. Not one of them, ladies and gentlemen, not one of them complies with international law. Not one. All of them are designed to coerce the Palestinians to accept Israel's conditions. Like Blair with his ever-ready promise of cash, wrapped in an expired political message, Western politicians failed after all these years to grasp a simple fact. It is far cheaper and more lasting and more honorable, if that's the criterion, to repatriate the refugees and to not have to hand them out donations all the time. We don't have much hope in that at the moment. The hope lies and remains with the Palestinians and those good people around the world who support them. But the perseverance of Palestinians gives us ideas. One of them, the United UNRWA records, are magnificent records for the odyssey of the refugees. They record the history from home to exile. Actually, I call the records of UNRWA to be the genome of refugeehood. How can we use that? We can use that to design or to suggest the return plan. First of all, we know where every village in Palestine has been exiled. This is an example of Algeria, which is in the south of Palestine. These Algeria people are found in these refugee camps, most of them in Gaza, as you can see, some in Jordan, and very few in Lebanon. We also know where the people of Beit Mahsir, which is a village west of Jerusalem, we know where they are. That's just an example. We know also where the people from Safaria and Galilee went. Here they are. But more importantly, that is the flight from home to exile. But now we are planning the return plan. So we have to know how to get them back. In other words, instead of looking at the village in Palestine where they have gone, we now look at every camp and say where the people from this camp come from. So in reverse, we can get this. The village, the Jabalia camp, which is of course known to many of you, these are the villages of the people who are now exiled in Jabalia. Now, the question is often asked, why is Gaza Strip crowded? People don't bother to answer this. This is also the Risha camp, right? And here, this one is Hilwa, which is known to many of you. That's the camp in the top, and the red dots are the villages from which those people were expelled. Gaza is crowded for a simple reason. All these red dots, you see, 247 villages have been depopulated by the Israelis in 1948. ethnic cleansing was not 100% complete in Galilee, but it was 100% complete in the south of Palestine. So, Gaza represents the people who have been expelled and herded into a refugee camps in Gaza. That is why it's crowded. In this small, tiny piece of land, 1% of Palestine lives 1.5 billion people, who are the same number of people of all Palestinians in 1948. Imagine if you gathered all the Palestinians in 1948 in the Nakba, you put them in 1%, you get Gaza. But unfortunately, their suffering did not end. Their suffering is not continuous. There is a very clear indication, even before Goldstone, that what happened there is a war crime. It's a constantly committed war crime and also a crime against humanity. Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, Article 8, Para 6, says war crimes mean, inter alia, starvation or impeding relief supplies. Gaza siege, starvation, cutting off supplies is also genocide. Article 6, Para C of the same statute says genocide is, inter alia, deliberately inflicting on the people, on the group, conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Ironically, ladies and gentlemen, the best person to describe the situation in Gaza is a Jewish, Polish legal scholar. He wrote, his name is Raphael Lenkin, he wrote in 1943. He wrote in 1943 the following. Genocide doesn't necessarily mean the immediate destruction of a nation. It is a coordinated plan of different actions aimed at the destruction of essential foundations of life of national groups and the disintegration of their political and social institutions. I don't find a better description of the situation in Gaza than this. But should we just listen and think of that? Should we allow this to continue? The answer is obviously no. All of us, Palestinians or otherwise, must actively work for the return of refugees. We know that the return of refugees is an inalienable right, but is it logistically possible? The first question to ask, in order to answer this question, is to see what really happened with the land of the refugees. I told you how it was looted and plundered, but now we want to have a close look at what is happening in Israel. This is part of the Israeli Plan 2020, which is produced by 250 Israeli experts. It shows Israel in 1994 and what it should be in 2020. The only thing I want to remind you that only 12% of Israel is fully occupied or used heavily. The rest is for the kibbutz. We will represent 1% of the population, but the majority of this land, 88%, is for the army. How is that? Take a case. Take the very heavily changed part of Palestine from Jaffa, Jerusalem line in the north to Gaza in the south. That was the situation before expulsion. These are villages. The lines indicate the land area of these villages. So, what happened? The Israelis expelled them and built in their place. The area in blue is the extent today of the Israeli urban expansion. I mentioned earlier that JNF confiscated some of these lands. This is the land confiscated by JNF for some kibbutz. Then, what happened after that? This area now is used for military purposes. These red dots are part of 1,000 strategic and military points in Israel, and the yellow is closed area, also military. They are used for this purpose. If you compare that with the built-up area, urban built-up area, you see Even if you ignore the built-up area, the place is only used for these military objectives. And, of course, if the refugees return, keeping the Israeli urban expansion as it is, it will not be a problem at all. Now, we apply this example in some more detail to the southern district. We made a study of about 1,300 towns and villages and asked the question, who lives there now? Well, we categorized it in 5 categories. First, the remaining Palestinians. 2, the Ashkenazis who came during the mandate and who actually built the state. 3, Arab Jews who came in the 1950s and 60s. 4, Russians. 5, assorted Jews who came usually after 1967. So in this category, we have identified who lives in these. As you can see, the southern districts, the largest number of population is in 3 originally Palestinian towns. That's Beersheba, that is Majdan, and that's Islam. This is the new one, Arabic and Palestinian. The rest is empty. The rest is empty. What would happen if we now tell the refugees to return to their homes? They actually can come, mostly from Gaza, and they can settle in their places. First of all, there is no conflict space that a single refugee camp in Gaza. Single refugee camp in Gaza. So they reserve this place, preventing people from return for reasons which are clear to you. We can apply the same example to the northern district, Galilee. Here we have in this area 50% of the population are Palestinian today. So when the refugees come from Lebanon camps, a matter which is welcomed by a lot of people, then they will come to be united with their separated families. They will find cousins and friends and so on. So the question is really, what is the problem of that? The Israelis say, yes, it is true. By the way, I started on this about 10 years ago. Not a single Israeli scientist or geographer or planner disputed the facts. They only disputed my motives. So that's okay. They say if the refugees return, then Israel will not be a Jewish state. And of course, that is a fallacy in many grounds. First of all, Israel, on its state legitimization, bases legitimacy on the partition plan. The partition plan never envisaged, and could not have ever envisaged, an ethnic or religious state. Chapter 2 and 3 of partition plan clearly stipulate the protection of a minority in where the majority is, whether it is Arab within Jews or Jews in the Arabs. So it is impossible to expect that international law will ever condone an ethnic state. But they say the Arabs are a biological bomb, which is, of course, unfortunately, a very racist statement, but also it is a futile statement, because they will never do that. Short of Holocaust, of course, that's probably one situation. Because I can show you that these are the Palestinians in Palestine. The diaspora is the same number outside, and the Jews in the red line. And if you think that the immigration will have an upper limit, it is a question of when and what time, what year, the Palestinians will be a majority. Of course, being a majority doesn't guarantee that you have rights, but at least the idea that Israelis will be a majority is never going to be happening. Now, therefore, what we need to do is to think of the return plan other than the logistics of the place and so on. If we do that, the first thing we have to do is to think of water. As you can see, bottom line is the Palestinian consumption of water, and the top one is the Israeli 2/3 of the water is stolen from Palestinians. But that's only one part of this division. The Palestinian public property was the backbone of Israel, which was established as an innocent state on the morning of May 15, 1948. So, unfortunately, definitely, the Zionists in their mad rush to build Israel, they destroyed much of the environment and converted the landscape to an ugly concrete slab. And I quote Olental, the Israeli pollution scientist. This can be solved. It is only a matter of country development, none of which is beyond solution for planners or for engineers or for people who can deal with that. But all these things have to be done. Now, I say, let me go back now to my first statement at the beginning of the century. What did we learn from the last 100 years? That all the might of Zionism, supported by Western colonial powers, failed to bring the Palestinians to their knees. True, they lost their land. True, they have been killed and wounded and so on. But there are 11 million now, and half of them in Palestine, and 88% of them in Palestine and around it. Another lesson we learned that Israel, creating Israel, had a heavy price. Since they assassinated Lord Moyne in 1944, until Gaza assault in 2009, they created a reign of terror in the area. Millions have been displaced, hundreds of thousands wounded, thousands, tens of thousands killed. But Western powers have only to calculate, I wish they do that, calculate the cost of their aid and grants to Israel, whether economic or military. And they also must add the cost of protecting Israeli embassies and their war criminals when they are traveling around the world. Add to this the cost of protecting hundreds of airports around the world to see if it is all worth it. Supporting Israel, ladies and gentlemen, is like holding a pyramid. I'm an engineer, I know what that means. With its apex on the ground and its base on top. You can hold it, but you need strong hands forever. Is the West ready for that? Is the West ready for that? We can also learn from the last 100 years that you cannot fool the people all the time. Now that the wandering Jew is replaced by the wandering Palestinian refugee, many parts of the world are slowly but surely coming to grips with the Palestinian case. All the myths of Zionism are disappearing in the light of truth. Now there is a triple increase in NGOs, the People's Voice, from 2,000 to 6,000 registered at the United Nations now. And you can see their effect in Durban, in Geneva, in Gaza, in Cairo, in Aqaba, in Al Arish, and in capitals of Europe. We also learned, since World War I, that it was the Arab people, not their governments, who took the initiative in defending their homes and rights. Consider the cases in Palestine, which is obvious, in Lebanon, in Egypt in the 50s, in Algeria, and others. It was always the people who took the initiative. From Lawrence of Arabia to Hillary Clinton, many Arab governments, many, not all, bartered their people's national rights for preservation of their regimes. That calls for more and more and more people's action. But what should the players and spectators in this long-running tragedy do to bring the curtain down on a happy ending? I say this to Western powers. European governments, and particularly the UK, the home of Balfour, USA, of course, the chief player, have a duty to remove the evil they have created. They have a duty to enforce international law and UN resolutions. They should also force Israel to conclude and roll up the occupation and not to finance it. They should cease to feed Israel with weapons of mass destruction through the so-called 60 scientific agreements with Israel. Germany should cease to supply Israel with submarines, and USA, of course, cease to supply them with phosphorus bombs. But at least they should terminate the European Union-Israel agreement, which is a well-known document. It's an absolute shame to keep it. And of course, Blair should stop playing charades by sending one mission to another. Let Blair stop playing that game. It's over. It doesn't fly anymore. And as I said, it's cheaper and honorable solution to work for the return of refugees, especially in the case in the situation of crushing economic crisis. It may be worth thinking about. It's definitely cheaper than what the West pays UNRWA, pays Israel, pays NATO, pays the forces in Iraq and Afghanistan and probably Iraq. It's definitely cheaper. I can give you numbers. All we have to do is to wake up the global UNCCP. Wake it up, reactivate it, to resume its duties to repatriate refugees. This should be done by passing a binding Security Council resolution according to Chapter 7 of the Charter. Failing that, we know it could fail, facing the US veto, we may need a General Assembly resolution under United for Peace formula, or else we can apply for Israel's conditional membership to be revoked because it failed to meet its obligations. UNRWA, of course, will be the main instrument for repatriation and a rich history. But with the return of refugees with no displacement to the present occupants, as you can see, if they wish to live in a country with no racism or apartheid, you will have a permanent and cheap solution. You don't have to carry the perimeter in safety anymore. You tried everything else. Why don't we try this one? Of course, the doctor will say, well, the balance of power is against us. We are helpless. No, we're not. If we were, Palestinians would not be in the headlines today after 92 years. We would be finished long time ago, but we are far from that. And I say this to our Arab brothers. The Arab states should take an active, not passive role to support Palestinian rights, as their own people constantly demand. It's no good to hide behind the slogan, we accept what the Palestinians accept. Arabs should rewrite the so-called peace initiative. Its article on refugees is faulty and misleading. It says that the right of return is subject to the approval of Israel, which of course, how could anyone expect it to be conditional upon the acceptance of those who deny it? And to the Palestinians I say, keep your struggle, maintain your resilience and determination. As a priority, you must elect a new leadership to represent truly and democratically 11 million Palestinians, 3/4 of whom are refugees. This new leadership will defend the right of return resolutely and effectively. And I say to all, no matter how you try, there will be no happy ending to conclude this unique tragedy without restoring justice, without restoring the inalienable rights of the Palestinians. The proverbial pyramid must rest on its base of justice to stay stable. As the Quaker officer said 6 days ago, our desire is to return home is as genuine and deep as a man's longing for his home can be. Thank you very much.
There was a tremendous amount of information in this presentation. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. I think we'll take the questions in 2 or 3, but if you could please, I think there's a microphone here, and identify yourselves, and we'll take them maybe in sets of 3, if that's okay.
My name is Yasmin Moore. Thank you very much for your lecture. I wonder if you could say more about the percentage or the number of Palestinians who actually want to return compared to the Palestinians who just want the right to return, and if there's a difference.
Thank you for your optimistic presentation. It's refreshing. I have just a question of methodology. how did you ascertain where all the refugees were? What were their villages of origin? I mean, is that information available? Did you do research over 10 years? I'm just wondering.
Thank you, Hassan Awar. I agree, and I hope that return is inevitable, because justice supervenes simply in life, not only in history. So there will be return, I hope, before we die. But after your very informative lecture, you did not tell us anything about means towards this return, which I believe in, like many others, very much, but not the means. المقاومة in Lebanon is very much besieged. There is no Arab leader which says it with a loud voice, a clear voice, that we stand by it. Gaza Strip is under besiege, not only by political decisions, but most recently by a religious declaration. Other Palestinians in the camp, our brothers, we are all Arabs, we are all Orientals, including the Oriental Jews, which used to live in my village, in Lebanon, everywhere. Like us, they were sons of this land and daughters of this land. But still, as you said, the misery continues and the ma'sat continues. So can you kindly try to identify some means towards this return? دلنا طريق شوي.
Young lady asked about who wants to return. I'm not really interested in the answer to this question in general terms. I'm interested in answering who. Because the right of return is an inalienable right. It's an intrinsic right. It's a right you have. You exercise it when you want, or you don't exercise it when you want. Take a simple example. Lebanese in Brazil, if he decides to come back to Lebanon, nobody says you have certain time, otherwise you're not allowed to return. The Greeks in the United States, they can return any time. To return to your home is an inalienable right, which means nobody can revoke that. And therefore, it is not really a season ticket that when it's expired, you cannot do it anymore. So, what we should work for is that this inalienable right must be honored and implemented. Now, it's up to the person to exercise it when he wants. There is no restriction on that. How did they find the information? The secret information. Not really a secret, but it is based on the records of the United Nations. Because we made an analysis of these records, and they tell us every single refugee, what's his name, where he comes from, where he is now, and his family and so on, and we can construct from that a lot. However, we must remember that of the 7 million refugees, 4.7 only are registered in the United Nations, because originally that was based on need for food and shelter. There is about 1.5 million Palestinians who are not refugees, but we know all of them. They are mostly city people who had education, so they did not register. The means, of course, this is a big question. Otherwise, we'll not be waiting 92 years to speak about this. The question is, the first thing, in my view, is that the Palestinians should never give up the right of return. Because if you give it up, nobody else can take it away from you unless you decide, I don't want it. Nobody, no leader, Palestinian or otherwise, or Western leaders, can take it away from you. So the first thing is to keep it alive in your mind, in your action, to your children, grandchildren. That's number one. Number two, the attempt to get it or to work for it in the 70s through PLO and revolution has taken its course. Maybe it will come back again, I'm not sure. But what I'm sure about is that at the moment, and I travel a lot around the world, there's a great body of people in Europe and America to some extent who are fully aware of the Palestine case. then there is a huge body of legal regimes which are now in place, which are condemning the war crimes, and also human rights organizations all the time are on the side of the right of return. And these, as I said, 6,000 NGOs are now registered with the United Nations, maybe by now there are even more, and they create a great deal of people's pressure in many countries. Now, this pressure has no meaning in some countries. So what if people make a demonstration or something? Sometimes actually they are not even allowed. Why the right of return movement is stronger, for example, in Europe and sometimes in America? Because people can assemble, can speak. In Arab countries, this is limited unless it is within the policy of the government where they are residing. So coming back to this, in these countries, these people who are supporting Palestine influence their MPs and hence their parliaments. I joined the International Conference on UNRWA about a few weeks ago, and many people sitting by me were members of the House of Lords, of the House of Commons. And the people on the floor are mostly British, and they are applying a lot of pressure on their MPs. I one time heard a Danish MP lady, she told me, we listen to these people because otherwise they'll not elect us next time. So we create a lot of pressure through that. And as I said again, the legal regime, human rights, the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 4th of July 2004 is an important document and must be implemented. It's the most important document since Balfour Declaration. It really clearly states that the West Bank and Gaza are occupied territories, and it clearly states that Palestine have right to freedom. It clearly states that. We need to use that. Unfortunately, as we all know, the people who officially deal with that on the Palestinian side are not yet equipped for that. But this is compensated by a great deal of people's work everywhere. And we are making great progress in enlightening the people. But it's a long struggle, but the road is clear. There can be no way of keeping this situation forever. And I hope this will not take longer.
Thank you for the lecture. I didn't find out from your lecture, do you support one-state solution or two-state solution?
For this really outstanding effort. I just have some curiosity whether you have presented this excellent work to the Palestinian negotiating team and what their response was.
You mentioned something really dangerous or threatening, which has to do with the ontological idea behind the establishment of UNRWA. You even, if I am not mistaken, went to the extent of accusing UNRWA as being an accomplice to a wider conspiracy during its inception. This is one part of my question. The second part of my question is, how could we return the mechanisms of return? Our right is inalienable, but I believe that it's preconditioned by the dismantling of the Jewish state, the establishment of a democratic secular Palestine with two nationalities, two ethnic groups if possible, if you agree to that, and necessarily through reactivating resistance, a democratic national secular resistance. Thank you.
I'll deal with the simple question first. Well, you know, that the PLO, in my view, is not functioning at the moment. But the PA, we try, and we send them things they know, and they could know more if they wish. Why they don't, they have their other agenda, and that's why I called very clearly that there should be new elections for a new Palestine National Council representing 11 million people. The last National Council was held in Algiers in 1988. And since then, the Palestinians have doubled. Half the Palestinians are born after that. They have no voice. The children of Intifada, the first Intifada, are now like these young people here, even older. They have no voice. They have no voice. And the people in Ramallah, who are under the present government, are 18% of the Palestinians. Those in Gaza are 12. Even if you assume that there have been elections, local elections inside Palestine, you are talking about 30% of Palestinians. So 70% have no voice. And when they have voice, then they have institutions and they have people who really work hard for the Palestinian rights. I hope this will come. The question about one state and your question, second part of your question dealing with what kind of state, I really do not give much thought to that. The reason is simple. All I care about is that every human being, according to Article 13 of the United Nations Human Rights Declaration, has the right to return home. And he also has the right to be free. Now, if everyone was being expelled from his home, returned to his home, and lives in his home, in freedom and equality, no racism, no discrimination, no apartheid, then whatever system the people like to live under is their own choice, because this choice will be democratic choice. So we are not at the moment in a position to pontificate what kind of state it's going to be, who's going to live in it. All what you need to do is to let people return and live freely. And then those who like to live in that free environment where everyone is equal, that's their business. I personally do not have any, I'm not partial to what kind of system is going to be, as long as people willingly and truly elect that system. So the question is a little bit premature. What we should work for, people should return to their homes. Now, UNRWA, I'm not hard on UNRWA. I like a lot of people in UNRWA. I deal with them a lot. The question is, it is absolutely true. I looked at, I mentioned Philadelphia archives for the Quakers, and I have seen, while the negotiations were going on in Lausanne, the State Department gathered about 20 groups in Washington, and I have the minister meeting for that. And they gathered who? Oil companies who operate in Saudi Arabia, all relief organizations, all religious organizations, and some organization dealing with development and so on. And they asked them, how can we replace or resettle the refugees elsewhere? What can we do? What money do we need? What organization we need? And that is when Etheridge resigned, because then at that time, the change of course, as I said, took place because they followed the Israeli pressure line. You cannot get the refugees back. They will be fifth column. They will be this and that.
What is their actual standing
now? No, let me just say this. So after that, they took this different course. They sent Johnston divide the Arab waters between them. They promised lots of things, but actually this did not work out in the end. But it was definitely a plan on that, and there is a record for that. So, but after that, the refugees absolutely refused, and they had to take care of them, and they did take care of them during the massacre of Khan Yunis 1956, and Blake 1953 by Sharon, when he killed a lot of people in refugee camps, up to Jenin 2002. They have done a great job.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive piece of information. I was very impressed, really. I only have one question, please. I liked all your lecture except for a few parts, which was almost moralizing when you said Europe must do this, Germany must not send submarines, the USA and so on. Once I heard Kofi Annan, the UN General saying about the wall. He said simply the wall, it's not the wall, it's a fence. And tall fences make good neighbors. This was a man in the top priority of, the UN. Can't you believe with me that charity starts at home? And that if we send something to Ramallah there, we say at least dissolve or do something else? If you were to recommend something for this PA, can you say dissolve the authority or you say something else? Thank you.
Ali Wahdi Al-Balad newspaper. Thank you for your enlightening lecture, Doctor. I just have two quick questions. In a few words, how would you define a Palestinian today? And my second question is, we read about your correspondence with Rabbi Michael Lerner, and we would just like to know, is there any communication with other Israelis or Jews? And do you think this communication may lead into a breakthrough in this right of return? Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I have a couple questions. Coming from the diaspora in San Francisco, so that's where my scope is, with some contact in other parts of the diaspora international. A couple of concerns or questions, maybe for advice. For the young generation of Palestinians, it often feels really difficult for us to seek the advice of the old generation who have experience with mobilizing and resistance without sort of being manipulated or being pushed into a certain direction. And how can we seek that advice and build trust intergenerationally? And how can we in the diaspora as refugees and just people in the diaspora also seek, regain our voice and actually seek that representation that you're talking about, because right now no one has that. But I feel like in the US at least, the rebuilding of the PLO as an institution, or the PLO institutions, is a big fear because people associate them with selling out, or the Fatah leadership, who is, or some people call corrupt. So I'm all over the place, but if you could give any advice to the young generation of activists.
I concentrated in Europe a little bit because I really have faith, hope in Europe. I am there most of the time, and I see things change a lot. Take England, I was there in 1960, and it's unbelievable how the situation changed. At that time, you could not even mention the word Palestine, and they called us Arab refugees who could come from Mauritania. There was a great deal of hostility at the time. So Europe has changed a lot, and I have very, very high hopes. This will continue. There is no way it's going to diminish. I have spoken to almost every big city in Europe, and I see the same picture. Of course, things start small and grow, but they grow in a democratic country where people can make their voices heard, and this voice in the end reaches their MPs and then it goes to their parliaments and maybe the press and so on. So no, I'm sad that Europe is yet doesn't have the courage to speak what the people tell me in closed rooms because they defer to the United States. I hope they can get out of this because it's good for them, because Europe is our neighbor, and most of the economy between Europe and the Middle East is very strong, and well, I hope so. I mean, this is an area which I have great faith in at the moment. I mean, great hope, to be more accurate. So that's why. The Arab situation is known to all of you. I don't need to elaborate on that. I hope it will change peacefully, because otherwise it will change, but not peacefully. So let's just hope that. Define a Palestinian. Define a Palestinian. There's a simple way to define a Palestinian. The Palestinian Charter of 1968 defines a Palestinian. The one whose normal residence is in Palestine during the mandate. And the one who was born after that in diaspora from with a parent, Palestinian parent or a Palestinian mother. It was very progressive. It gave women always the right to give nationality to their children about 40 years ago. So that's a good one. Jews who I spoke to, and there are different kinds of Jews. I mean, say Jews, I don't mean Israelis, even Israelis. In Europe, it is said that 75% of Jews are liberal, meaning that they are ready to listen. But actually, there is something called J Street now, as you know. The question is, I have for all of them a test. If they pass this test, they are my friends. This litmus test is, do you agree to my right to return to my home or not? Simple. A lot of people said no. One of them is Uri Abdali, who is a peace activist. I had dinner with him for 2 hours discussing in Paris some years back. In the end, he told me he was a terrorist. He told me he was a member of a terrorist organization. He told me he killed Palestinians, and he's sorry. That's why he's now working hard for peace. His wife was with him. I told him, Uri, do you agree that I return to my home, who is next to your home? I'm not taking your home. I just want to return to your home, to my home next to you. He said, no. I said, why? He said, no, I don't accept that. I said, we are in Paris. If you buy an apartment in Paris, and a Frenchman says, I don't want a Jew next to me, what will you do? He said, we'll raise hell. We'll never, let it pass. How can a Frenchman in France refuse a Jew to live next door to him? I said, what kind of logic is that? Those people of this kind have a simple formula. They want to buy 80% of Palestine against defending the Palestinians to remain in 20%. So Palestine for them is that 20%, of course, with no sovereignty, with no water, with no land, with no air, with no borders, with no political independence. We give you that, but forget about Palestine, 80%. What about 675,000 villages? If that is the problem, how did we have a problem in the first place? 1967, before that, it was the problem. The problem started in 1948. So, in answer to your question, there are many good friends I like and I admire, and they are good friends. One of them is Ilan Pape, the other one is Yuri Davis, and I have been together in a conference, speaking together at the Norman Finkelstein. And I can count them probably in one hand. So let us hope they grow, because if they grow, it's good for all the Jews in the world. Liang, your question is wonderful, because wherever I go, I meet people like you. You know, I was with you in Los Angeles and places like that. I have great faith in this young generation. I'm born in Palestine. I was 10 during Nakba. But I find these young people are more determined than we are. They are more sophisticated. They are more confident, and they are articulate, and they can use tools we did not have. In 1948, very few people even spoke English. Now we have neighborhoods in Stockholm, in Los Angeles, and people, as I said, the wandering Jew is replaced by the wandering Palestinian refugee, and of course he passes the message just by being there. So I think there is great potential for them, and I know the society is there, and I hope that you people get together more and more. I know with a number of societies, and they are creating a voice, but this has to grow even more and more. But don't give up, because you will be carrying the flag. I think that's it.
Another round of questions.
That's it.
Thank you very much for your lecture. My name is Tamer Amar. I'm Lebanese, and I would ask you to comment briefly the legal status and treatment of Palestinians in Lebanon is shameful. Do you believe, what is your view on the normalization of the status of Palestinians in a state like Lebanon?
Hello, thank you for your lecture. I'm just wondering, I'm from Germany, and I was very surprised by your description of Europe and by expressing that you have hope in Europe, because personally I was very frustrated, because first of all, of course, the rejection of Angela Merkel, who said that, well, yeah, it's the fault of the Palestinians because Hamas was sending rockets to Israel, and this opinion was mainly adopted by the German population. And I mean, there have been demonstrations against it, and I was very happy about it, but the people who went there were mainly people from the old German peace movement. They were Palestinians, they were Egyptians, they were Moroccans, they were sometimes part of the German left,